Thank you, everyone. I'd like to invite the speakers for the first panel, Ben White from the Middle East Monitor and Professor Noor Masalha from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London.
Thank you.
This session is titled The Unfinished Business of Decolonization in Palestine. It is an attempt to re-examine the nature of the conflict, or what is referred to as the conflict in Palestine. One view is that this is not a conflict between two equal parties, but rather it is a struggle against a colonial entity by a people who have been subjected to colonial rule. One of the interesting things that is very often overlooked by students and people who encounter the Palestinian issue is that we are before a project which specifically stated its aim was to colonize Palestine. This was according to the initial declaration in 1897, which was released in Basel after the First International Zionist Conference, that their aim was to colonize Palestine. Today, however, it is not viewed in this way. It is viewed as a dispute over lands by two equal parties. So our distinguished speakers, Ben White and Professor Masalha, will examine this issue of decolonization in Palestine, very much in the same framework as it was against colonial, settler colonialism in Algeria, in Rhodesia, and in South Africa. Our first speaker, Ben White, is a writer and lecturer. He writes for the Middle East Monitor in London, has spoken widely in the United States, and here in Brazil. He told me this morning that he spoke here in this very lecture theater some years ago. Ben writes specifically, he's a specialist on Israel, and he's written a very important book on apartheid in Palestine, or apartheid Israel, as he titles it. So I'll hand over to him and give him at least half an hour to discuss this issue of decolonization in Palestine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daud. Eu vou começar a falar rapidinho em português, porque eu posso. Agradeço todas essas pessoas na USP que fez uma força para realizar esse congresso. Eu cheguei no Brasil hoje bem de manhã cedo, às 6 horas de manhã. E eu estou muito feliz de voltar para o Brasil. Eu morava aqui 2 anos, a 2007 para 2009. E eu sempre estou feliz que quando eu tenho a possibilidade de voltar para ver os amigos e para fazer as coisas que eu gosto de fazer. Então, eu vou fazer minha palestra no inglês, mas eu não quero que isso está entendido como falta de respeito, mas porque eu acho que eu não vou conseguir falar exatamente o que eu quero dizer em português. Então, eu vou falar em inglês. Eu não sei. Foi dito mais cedo que tem headphones para tradução, se alguém precisa lá atrás. Então, agora eu vou virar para inglês. So thank you very much for having me here to speak. And yeah, I'm going to be addressing one aspect of the issue of the decolonization of Palestine. Like was actually mentioned in the opening comments, next year is a year of anniversaries. And I wanted to mention one anniversary in particular to begin with, which is the 50th anniversary of Israel's military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. So that's half a century, 2 generations. millions of Palestinians who have lived for 50 years under the control of an occupying army whose political leaders they cannot change or vote for. And amongst those Palestinians is an Israeli settler population that is now well over 600,000 people and always rising. And those settlers, they benefit from an institutionalized regime of privilege in their favor and discrimination against the Palestinians that they live amongst. An interesting sort of fact to consider for the point that I want to make today is that Israeli citizens who live in the settlements in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, since 1967, Israeli settlers have now voted in 14 different elections in Israel, okay, in the Knesset, for national elections, 14 different elections since 1967. And of course, the Palestinians that they live amongst and around haven't voted in any of those Israeli elections, despite the fact that the ultimate authority in their lives is the Israeli army. So, yes, we're talking about a military occupation that is ongoing, but not just an occupation. And in fact, for me at least, the word decolonization that is in the title of this session gives us a very important arrow towards how we should be understanding events past and present in Palestine. Because what has happened now over the last decade, 50 years since 67 at least, is that Israel has created a de facto one state. Israel has created a de facto single state between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And it's a territory whose residents are privileged or discriminated against on a racial basis. So let's take as the first example the Palestinians who have got Israeli citizenship. 20% of Israel's citizens are Palestinians inside the pre-67 lines. And contrary to the boasts made by the Israeli government and by the Israeli government's advocates around the world, non-Jewish citizens of Israel do not enjoy equal rights, either under the law or in practice. So, for example, today, in the southern Israel, in the pre-67 lines, in the Naqab, the Negev desert, you'll find, although not for much longer, the village of al-Hiran, whose residents are facing imminent mass demolition of their homes and expulsion. These are Bedouin Palestinians with Israeli citizenship awaiting the destruction of their homes, specifically in order for the state to build a Jewish community in its place. Okay, in the words of Adala, a legal rights group based in Haifa, this is explicitly, quote, dispossession and displacement for strictly racial reasons. And that is only one case from so many of official state-sanctioned discrimination. So here's another example. Across Israel's pre-67 territory, there are hundreds of Israeli communities off limits to Palestinian citizens because they are filtered out by so-called residential selection committees or residential admission committees, which can reject the application of a potential resident on the grounds of social suitability. The discrimination facing Palestinian citizens of Israel affects every single area of life, where you can build, education, state benefits, municipal planning, the right to political protest and freedom of speech. It even affects love and who you can marry and what kind of spouse you can live with. And just to explain that, so on Israel's law books for just over a few more years than a decade now, there has been a law that separates Palestinian husbands and Palestinian wives. The law says that an Israeli citizen, and of course this almost only applies to Palestinian citizens of Israel, it makes it almost impossible for them to bring a spouse from the West Bank or Gaza Strip to live with them inside Israel. Okay, so an Israeli citizen is unable to bring a Palestinian spouse from the West Bank or Gaza Strip to live with them. And this is a law separating families, separating couples, purely on the basis of national origin. And of course, it's also a law that was actually upheld by Israel's Supreme Court, a court, an institution which many people outside of the region mistakenly believe to be a bastion of liberal values and a place where minority rights are sensibly protected. Then if we take a look at Israeli-occupied East Jerusalem, which Israel, of course, unilaterally annexed after 1967, the majority of Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem are neither full citizens, nor are they under military occupation like Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Instead, they have residency. Effectively, under Israeli law, Palestinians in East Jerusalem are treated like immigrants in their own country, even though it's Israel who emigrated to them, as it were. And that residency status can be stripped away based on a number of factors, including, for example, if you cannot prove to the Israeli authorities that your so-called center of life is in Jerusalem. Okay, so if you go outside to study, or even if, for example, you married someone from the West Bank and went to live in the West Bank, you are at risk of having your residency in East Jerusalem stripped from you by the Israeli authorities. It is a method of slow motion ethnic cleansing. Just recently, we had documented the fact that there are currently 180 eviction cases that have been filed against Palestinian households in occupied East Jerusalem. And that threatens more than 800 people with displacement, with forced displacement. 3/4 of those eviction cases are based in two areas in particular, called Silwan and Sheikh Jarrah. And those two areas are areas of occupied East Jerusalem, where the Israeli authorities have been working with settler groups, with so-called private settler groups, in order to expel and colonize. And all of that is taking place, that kind of micro-colonization, if you can put it like that, all of that is taking place in parallel to much larger scale colonial expansion in settlements like Ramat Shlomo, Gilo, and Har Gilo. Okay, settlements which you might have heard of in the news in terms of how often the Israeli authorities are processing or advancing various settlement expansion plans. Don't forget that the mayor of Jerusalem, Nir Barkat, openly, proudly believes in the necessity of maintaining a Jewish majority in the city. Think about that for a second. The mayor of the city that Israel calls its capital openly believes that there should be a particular ideal ethnic ratio in the city and is willing to advance policies to that end. Nir Barkat also has openly boasted of how he works with the Shabak, the Israeli security services, and the Israeli police in order to impose collective punishment on Palestinian neighborhoods of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is truly an apartheid city. And that pattern of expel and settle that you can see in the Negev, Nakab, that you can see in East Jerusalem, is similarly replicated all across the West Bank too. So take, for example, the southern Hebron Hills, where villages like Susia or al-Khair, those residents also are facing the prospect of imminent mass demolition of properties and expulsion, on the grounds, say the Israeli authorities, that their properties have been built illegally. But the Israeli occupation authorities, of course, make it almost impossible for Palestinians in 60% of the West Bank to obtain that permit that can only be given by the Israeli occupation authorities. So, for example, a study that was done by the UN in 2008 found that 94% of all planning applications submitted by Palestinians in Area C were rejected by the Israeli occupation authorities. So Israel creates a bureaucratic system that gives a facade of legality to policies that constitute, in reality, forced displacement and colonization. In al-Khair, which I just mentioned last month, Israeli soldiers came and carried out the fifth set of demolitions of properties this year alone. And a few days later, they came back to distribute more demolition notices for things like, and I quote, homes, barns, barracks, and residential caves. Then if you look at the Jordan Valley, the area, of course, in the east part of the West Bank, it's the same story. Palestinians are being systematically displaced at the same time as Israeli settlements thrive and expand. According to the UN, during 2016 to date, more than 2,000 Palestinians have been affected one way or another, either because they lost their homes or because they lost their agricultural way of life. More than 2,000 Palestinians have been affected in the Jordan Valley alone, this year alone, thanks to Israel's systematic policy of demolitions. And in fact, Israel is even targeting, for demolition, tents and shelters provided by international and local NGOs to those Palestinians who have already had their homes demolished. In 2011, European Union observers on the ground in Palestine said that what was happening there in terms of Israel's demolition policy was, quote, the forced transfer of a native population. The forced transfer of a native population. Does that sound to you like the kind of policy one would associate with the only democracy in the Middle East? Human Rights Watch, mainstream liberal global NGO, has talked about how Israel's regime in the West Bank is, quote, a two-tier system. A two-tier system, okay? NGOs like Human Rights Watch will not yet use words like apartheid, but you can see what they're saying. A two-tier system where Palestinians face systematic discrimination. And then there's the Gaza Strip, blockaded, fenced off, erroneously considered by some as a sort of humanitarian crisis isolated from the wider political context which has created it. The majority of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, remember, are refugees. The majority of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are refugees, and their lands and their homes are in some cases just a dozen miles away or so, the other side of Israeli soldiers, the other side of Israel's border fence. And restrictions on the freedom of movement and access for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip actually began 27 years ago, in 1989. And since then, Gaza has been incrementally and increasingly choked. And of course, the blockade reached its harshest levels in the last decade. To give you just one example of the horrific absurdity of Israel's blockade policy, Palestinians who manufacture, for example, furniture in the Gaza Strip have been prevented from sending that furniture for sale in Ramallah, in the West Bank. Okay? On the basis of security, of course, right? Because we all know that chairs are very dangerous. Now, in one sense, the Gaza Strip is emblematic of a key part of Israeli policy ever since the Nakba, ever since 1948, which is the most number of Palestinians possible on the smallest area of land possible. And finally, when we're discussing the issue of decolonization, we've looked at Israeli policies, or I've mentioned something briefly about Israeli policies affecting Palestinian citizens of Israel, those Palestinians in East Jerusalem, those Palestinians in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. But when we're talking about the decolonization of Palestine, we remember that actually the majority of Palestinians live outside of their historic homeland and are prevented from returning to this day. Why? Simply because they are not Jewish. Their lands and properties remain expropriated. Again, many live a short distance away from their lands and homes. And their right of return continues to be denied by fences and walls, by soldiers, and by racist legislation. And that leads us to what, in my mind, underpins the de facto one state that Israel has established. For its foundations are the Nakba. Its foundations are the Nakba. Arabic for catastrophe. The Nakba is what Palestinians use to describe the mass ethnic cleansing that took place when the State of Israel was established in 1948. An act of ethnic cleansing that has not finished, which is why many people talk about a Nakba that is ongoing. With the creation of the State of Israel, 4 out of 5, more or less, Palestinian villages inside the new state's territory were ethnically cleansed, their inhabitants prevented from returning. City neighborhoods were emptied of their Palestinian residents. The displacement of Palestinians began well before May the 15th, 1948, the official date of the establishment of the State of Israel. The displacement began well before then and continued long after. On the rubble of Palestinian homes and villages, the State of Israel was established as a Jewish and democratic state. That is to say, democratic for Jews and Jewish for Palestinians. Now, Israel maintains that there is nothing contradictory or nothing problematic, let's say, about its Jewish and democratic identity. But in reality, it is a key part of the settler colonial nature of the Israeli state. I haven't got time to illustrate a lot about this, but take this as one example. These are the words of Ariel Sharon, former Israeli Prime Minister, general, and war criminal. And he said this. He said, Arabs, of course not Palestinians, he said Arabs have rights in the land, but all rights over the land of Israel are Jewish rights. That's the quote. Now that's not just a semantic difference, what Ariel Sharon was saying there, and he said these words when he was Prime Minister. Right, Prime Minister in theory of all Israeli citizens. And he said Arabs have rights in the land, but the rights to the land itself, in Ariel Sharon's worldview, belong to the Jewish people per se. Now that is a very different understanding of a relationship between state and citizens from what we're used to understanding or thinking about in terms of liberal democracy. Just to give another example about that, Israel doesn't have a constitution, but instead it has a series of basic laws. And one of Israel's basic laws is called Basic Law, Human Dignity and Liberty. Okay, human dignity and liberty. It sounds nice, and if you just read it quickly, it looks like a law that exists to protect the rights of minorities within the state. But that law, that quasi-constitutional law, has an important caveat. Okay, and I'm just going to read you the one line that is the caveat. Quote, there shall be no violation of rights under this basic law except by a law befitting the values of the State of Israel, enacted for a proper purpose and to an extent no greater than is required. And what are the values of the State of Israel? The values of the State of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. So in other words, and this is how Israel's Supreme Court has applied it over the years, if there is a law or a policy that infringes on or violates the rights of non-Jewish citizens, it is permissible for that to happen if it is necessary in order to safeguard Israel's Jewish character. Now, the consequences today of Israeli ethnocracy, of Israeli apartheid, are that 1 in 7 of the Palestinian people are second-class citizens, a third of them are under military rule, and just over half are excluded from their homeland altogether. Now, the Israeli right, as represented by current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is quite keen to maintain the status quo for as long as possible, a permanently temporary occupation. The Israeli right, as represented by the likes of Naftali Bennett and Tzipi Hotovely, they want to take the necessary steps like formal annexation of parts or all of the West Bank, to create an openly, single, defiantly apartheid state. But the so-called Israeli moderates, represented today by the opposition figures like Tzipi Livni and the chair of the Labour Party, Isaac Herzog, what they want is separation through the form of creating a Palestinian Bantustan state. In the words of Yitzhak Rabin, the assassinated Israeli leader, what he wanted when he thought about Palestinian statehood was, quote, an entity which is less than a state. Those are the words he used not long before he was killed. Or, as Ehud Barak's 1999 election campaign put it, when he was standing for Labour, Israeli moderates, the campaign slogan was, us here, them over there. So as we look to heading into 2017, the 50th anniversary of Israel's military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, I think all of us have to be realistic about the reality on the ground today, and then shape our policies and our responses accordingly. Israel has created a one-state reality, and it is characterized by the Judaization of territory and space and the colonial displacement of Palestinians. It's happening in the Negev, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem. The methods and the legal mechanisms differ, but the goal is the same. This must be the starting point for analysts and activists, politicians and diplomats. And I want to suggest that this reality means an immediate focus on pressuring Israel to end discriminatory policies and human rights abuses. In other words, the logic of pressure must replace the logic of appeasement. Accountability must replace impunity, and solidarity must replace complicity. And going forward, again, I would suggest that the more important question might not be when will the two-state solution become impossible, or when will the window of opportunity for a two-state solution finally close, but rather how to transform an apartheid regime into one that is democratic and decolonized. Thanks very much.
Well done. You've heard a very excellent presentation, argument, which underscores several themes. The theme of occupation, the theme of domination, the theme of exploitation, but perhaps most importantly, that theme of apartheid, which is something that Israel seeks to keep out of the discourse, the contemporary discourse on Palestine, because it was when the apartheid system in South Africa became so repellent to world view and world public opinion that we saw its dismantlement by the sheer force of international solidarity. Israel today seeks to keep this word out of the discussion, apartheid. In my view, Ben clearly explained with evidence the nature of that state. Now, before I hand over to our next speaker, Professor Masalha, I want to draw your attention to a fact that all the resolutions that Ambassador Schreier pointed out to at the UN during the 1970s on decolonization, all those UN resolutions mentioned Palestine, whether it was on Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Namibia, they all mentioned Palestine. Today, all of those states have achieved their independence. The only exception is Palestine. And this gives us something to think about, and it's supposed to, no doubt, also lay the foundation for our future agenda. I have the honor to hand over the floor to Professor Masalha. He is a historian from what we call 1948 Palestine, the territories occupied in 1948. I think the Galilee region in the north of Palestine. Professor Masalha, his outstanding work has been on the depopulation of Palestine. His most perhaps outstanding work is the expulsion of the Palestinians, and widely read and studied in universities across Europe and the United States. So it's my honor and pleasure to hand over to Professor Noor Masalha.
A big thank you to Daud, and a big thank you to the organizers of this important conference, to Professor Arlene, to University of São Paulo, and to the various centers and departments involved, history, international relations, and to Ambassador from Brasilia, and to Professor Gibran from here. And I'm really, really excited to be in Brazil. This is my first time in Brazil. This is always first time in life. And this is my second day in Brazil, so don't really ask me what do I think about Brazil. I'll tell you at the end of this trip, but I'm really excited and delighted to be given this opportunity. About 10 years ago, I was writing an article about Edward Said, the late Edward Said, the great Edward Said, and Paulo Freire. And as a student, actually, we grew up with Paulo Freire. And I was thinking about, do they have anything in common? Of course, Paulo Freire came from social...
The translators need the mic.
Okay. Paulo Freire came from Catholic social teaching and from liberation theology. And Edward Said actually came from literature and from secular humanism. But they had an awful lot together. People from two different backgrounds having a lot together. And then I gave a lecture in Ramallah, in Palestine, on Paulo Freire. And to my surprise, I discovered actually his book was translated into Arabic and published in Beirut and in Cairo. And it was his famous book. Do you know his famous book? Yeah, very famous in America, especially in America, of Donald Trump. And they got the right translation for it. It's called Tarbiyat al-Hurriya, which is really about actually education for liberation. It wasn't actually about describing the situation of the oppressed, about how the oppressed can actually liberate itself. How do you have actually education from below? How do you actually educate students? Actually, this is something I've been actually struggling to answer for the last 30 years while teaching. How do we actually educate students? Actually, educating students actually is not about lecturing them. It's about actually bringing their potential and it bring actually inside out and bottom-up strategy. So I think the translators of the Arabic edition really got it absolutely right. I'm a historian by profession. I'm not a politician. I'm not against politicians like Donald Trump. I don't hate them. I'm not also I'm not a diplomat, so I don't have to be very careful. And I don't have to be polite. I can say I'm a historian, I'm a professional historian. I also think that historians also have an ethical duty to be truthful. So there's an ethical dimension to being a historian. Also, I'm a human rights activist. I've got a number of hats, and I will try to use these hats actually from time to time. The question is, can really history teach us something about today? Is history about the past? Or is it, I'm one of those people who think that history is about the past, present, and future. It does sound very strange to say history is about the future, but I will try to explain it. And my idea that history is about studying the past, but it's about also learning lessons from the past. It's about not repeating the mistakes of the past, the dreadful things about the past. We had an awful lot of terrible things about the past. Colonialism, slavery, slaughter in the First World War. Are we repeating the same mistakes of Oslo? Are we repeating the same mistakes we have been having in Palestine? So for me, the historian can actually play a role in terms of teaching us something about how to, not to reproduce the mistakes of the past, how to move forward, have to look at the past, but in fact, in terms of actually a better future. So I do want to think about actually history as something we can actually use in order to move forward, rather to be stuck. I don't really believe history should enslave us. It shouldn't actually close our mind. History ought to liberate us. So this is my motto, this is my, if you like, message to you about history and the history of Palestine and the history of the Palestinians. For us, history is also about the present. The past is the present in Palestine. I think Ben was talking about ongoing Nakba. The past is the present. We can't get away from the past. We, the Palestinians, are a nation of refugees. 2/3 of us are refugees. And therefore, history for us, memory for us, is not just history, but also memory is central to our identity. If we lose history, we simply don't exist because our colonizers said we don't exist. You remember Golda Meir said there is no such thing as Palestinians. Our colonizers tried to delete us from Palestine. So the question of history for us is an existential question. It's part of our, at the moment actually, I have written many books on Palestine, and some of my books, I think 5 books are in Spanish, published in Spain, but 1 published in Argentina. I've got also a journal also translated into Spanish, nothing in Portuguese, unfortunately. Arlene, maybe you should do something about it. Nothing in Portuguese. And also, recently I've been actually looking at the history of Palestine for the last 4,000 years, from the Bronze Age. And when I say Palestine actually existed for thousands of years, people get surprised because people say there is no Palestinian state. People confuse state with country. Palestine as a country has existed for hundreds and thousands of years. So I think we mustn't actually confuse the question of that Palestinian state. Palestine is the homeland of the Palestinian people, and it's a country which, you know, is there. It was the birthplace of Jesus. It was the birthplace of religions, actually. It's not a country which is obscure. It's a famous country, but as a country, it's a famous country. So the question for us here is how do we actually approach the question of Palestine internationally, and speaking to a solidarity group like this group. This is definitely a solidarity movement here, looking at the audience and the people who are interested. And I actually believe that solidarity abroad can't work without resistance at home. The reason why we have a solidarity movement in Brazil and internationally, partly because the Palestinians are resisting. If tomorrow we give up resistance, the solidarity movement will collapse. Also, we are resisting because there is a solidarity movement with us. I.e., there is a connection, there's a strong connection, dialectical, if you like, if you want Hegel or Marx, between resistance and solidarity. The two things existed, and the Israelis know that. The Israelis are targeting both. They're targeting Palestinians for extrajudicial killings, but also they're targeting the solidarity groups. If you arrive at Tel Aviv airport, the first thing the Israelis want to know where you're going. So I think don't tell them you're going to Palestine, tell them you're going to Bethlehem, and don't give them to. But there is a connection between the two. And with that solidarity, it's very difficult for us to continue to resist. But without resistance, also, a solidarity movement can't grow. So the two things are linked together, it was really an Arab historian, again, Ibn Khaldun, who described solidarity as a collective form of action. Solidarity as a trade unionist movement. Solidarity is a human, this is what actually connects us people, that solidarity thing. So I think the question of solidarity with Palestine, it's an important thing for Brazil, for those people who are fighting also for human rights in Brazil itself, against discrimination, so the two things are linked together, and we should also try to link them. In the case of, I think people actually try to hint at what is the conflict is all about. So there are two theories. One is that this is ethnic conflict or national conflict. The second theory, which I actually subscribe to it, this is a settler colonial conflict against indigenous people. So people say, well, what about nationalism? What about Palestinian nationalism? What about Israeli nationalism? Of course, we have two different nationalisms, but the Israeli nationalism is a nationalism of the settler colonizer. The Palestinian nationalism is a nationalism of the indigenous colonized who are resisting colonization. It's not that there is no national dimension to it. There is a national dimension, but the heart of it, the bottom line, at the heart of it, this is a settler about land and territory and demography between a colonizing movement, a European movement, a movement started in Europe, didn't start in Palestine. Truthfully, that it was really the Zionists who also internationalized the conflict. I mean, we're talking about international dimensions of the conflict. Why are we in Brazil? Because there's an international dimension of the conflict here. But in fact, it was the Zionists who internationalized the conflict 100 years ago. And they internationalized it even before they're coming to Palestine. Herzl went to the German Kaiser, to the Russian Tsar, even he went to the Ottoman Sultan to try to persuade him. And the first Zionist success was international success, the Balfour Declaration. That infamous declaration, statement on the 2nd of November 1917, was an international document. So the Zionists mobilized internationally before even they arrived in Palestine. We didn't do the international. We are doing the international now as a solidarity movement, but they globalized it, they internationalized the conflict. And this is important to describe how the international dimension of that conflict is started by them. And now we are also globalizing it in terms of solidarity. That solidarity with Palestine is one of the most globalized solidarity in the world now. And you go to Portugal, you go to Spain, you go to America, you go to France, you go to all these people. There are international internationalists, and there's an international solidarity movement also arriving in Palestine. Groups arriving in Palestine. So there's an international struggle going on. And Palestine become, if you like, globalized in many ways. And that difference between what the Zionists have done before and what they're doing now, they're still internationalists, by the way. They have lobbies everywhere. They work internationally. They are supported by the superpower, the global superpower on earth. And don't be fooled about Trump. Trump is not going to change fundamentally his support for Israel, if you like. And we are doing it from below, bottom-up strategy. Our strategy is also to try to globalize the conflict in terms of global solidarity. And because to some extent, the Zionists try to control the Palestinians, but they can't control the international solidarity movement. This is something you need to think about it and to remember. It's very difficult to control a movement which is a multilateral movement, a from below movement. And I think they will find it more and more difficult. The question is actually for historians, and Daud actually, you wanted me to talk about decolonization. Is it true? Can I confirm this with you? Okay, so for me as a historian, decolonization is about getting the story right, getting the history of Palestine right. The history of the conflict is not conflict between Jews, Muslims, and Christians. We don't have conflict between Muslims and Christians in Palestine. We didn't have conflict between Muslims and Jews in Palestine 100 years ago. It's not a conflict between Judaism and Islam. Forget about it. It wasn't like that. It wasn't until the advent of Zionism. It wasn't for hundreds of years. Jews lived with us in Jerusalem on equal footing. Jews were Palestinian Jews, Arabic-speaking Jews. So there is no conflict between Jews. In fact, I'm one of those people actually who wrote about the subject, wrote a couple of books. One is called The Bible and Zionism. In fact, Zionism, when it started in the 19th century, was a Christian Zionist movement. It wasn't even a Jewish movement. In the 19th century, in London, we had a Christian Zionist lobby in London in the 1840s, purely Christian. There were not a single Jew in London who was a Zionist. It began as a Christian Zionism. We know Christian Zionism is a big movement in America, by the way. So it didn't even begin as a Jewish thing. It began as a Protestant, by the way. I don't know. I don't want to go back too much, but it was a Protestant movement. And Herzl came 50 years after the Zionist lobby started. Still, Christian Zionists in America is a big lobby, millions of them, evangelical. I think you have some evangelicals in Brazil also. Maybe some, maybe many, I don't know. But I don't actually know the history of Brazil, so I'm reluctant to get into things which I don't know much about. But they still operate as a lobby. In London, the Zionists operate as a lobby. They still operate on the question of trying to influence governments from the top top-down approach, if you like. So I think we need to get the history right of the conflict, and we need to recover that history. We need to say we don't have anything against Jews or Judaism. Jews, Muslim and Christian were part of that Abrahamic tradition, which was a Middle Eastern tradition. So we need to separate the two. Historically, as historians, as individuals, we mustn't conflate them, we mustn't confuse them. I know the Zionists want to confuse them. We mustn't say we are not against Jews as such. And this is an issue actually for the solidarity movement. This is also for the Palestinians, and Palestinians have tried to do it. So the question is, I think Ben hinted at 1948 expulsion of the Palestinians. I wrote a number of books about it, but actually people did refer to Oslo. It's also an important point actually to go back to Oslo, and the ambassador mentioned Oslo, and yesterday I was asked by Brazilian television about Oslo. He said, oh, there was a period of optimism. It was a kind of optimistic period for many people. Suddenly we have a breakthrough, we have the shake hand, the famous shake hand between Rabin and Arafat on the White House lawn, and the television and the cameras, and we remember it vividly, all that sort of thing. Straight away, immediately after Rabin went back, he allocated budgets for expanding Israeli settlements. $400 million. I actually tried to document some of these things, actually. So Rabin operated at two levels. The first level is the PR level, if you like, is that we want peace, we want coexistence, we want them there, we want to be here, if you like. The second level, on the ground, it was creating facts on reality. It was business as usual. It was expanding the Israeli state. It was what I call facts on the ground. Facts on the ground, 20 years after Oslo, transformed the reality on the ground. In fact, the chances of a Palestinian state today in the West Bank is less than 20 years ago. It's quite extraordinary. Although we have a Palestinian Authority, although Gaza is somehow run by Hamas, in fact, the chances for a state, Palestinian state, on the West Bank and Gaza, which is 20% of historic Palestine, is less today than 20 years ago, doubling the Israeli settlements on the West Bank. So what exactly the Israeli strategy after Oslo? It was still, I think Ben also mentioned that, so Ben and I are kind of bouncing off each other. It was really, I wrote a book called Maximum Land, Minimum Arabs. This was a book written in Arabic, but translated into English under the title A Land Without a People. Maximum land. The Israeli strategy is still maximum land, i.e. maximizing the territory of the Israeli state and minimizing the presence of the Arabs in the Israeli state. And the same strategy applies to the West Bank, i.e. taking Gaza out of the Jewish state. I think Ben hinted at it. Gaza has got 2 million Palestinian refugees. If you take them out of the Jewish state, you get rid of a lot of Arabs, minimum Arabs. But you lose very little territory, by the way. If you take Palestinian cities like Ramallah out of the Jewish state and give the Palestinian Authority to run these territories, you actually lose a lot of Arabs. Israel is not responsible to budget them, to look after them. The PA looks after the people. Israel looks after the land, the sovereignty, the water. In fact, the Israeli control of the West Bank is much more deeply rooted today, much more entrenched, much more linked together with the settlements, the siphoning of water, than 20 years ago. So you have a virtual reality, if you like, symmetry, if you like, and the real reality on the ground, underground. Israel is actually consolidating what Ben actually tried to describe. It's apartheid. Oslo did not dismantle apartheid, actually repackaged it. It made it possible. I actually think that as a historian, historians have to assess things long term. Journalists actually think about the last story. You know, I was interviewed by a journalist. I mean, he's interested in his story. Do I have a story to tell him? And historians actually don't think about stories like that, actually. Think about histories of the last 20 years. We need to assess the last 20 years. In fact, actually made it much more tougher for us to resist on the ground. The most recent uprising, the Palestinian uprising on the ground about a year ago, 15 months ago, in fact started in East Jerusalem, did not start in Ramallah. In East Jerusalem under Israeli. But it was very difficult for this uprising to continue. Before that, we had two uprisings which went on for about 3 years. The most recent uprising, actually within months, was brought under control. Partly it's very difficult for Palestinians actually to do that. And the Palestinians under the PA can't do uprisings. Can't do uprising. It's very difficult to do uprising, intifadas under the PA. We know the fate of Arafat. Arafat ran away. He didn't create the uprising, last uprising. He ran away with it. He was surrounded by Israeli tanks. I went to see him, 2000. And eventually he was poisoned by plutonium. We know that story. But that story you would not hear it from the BBC and the media because it's not something you talk about. The BBC and the media will talk about Russians poisoning Russian dissidents in London. They would never talk about Israelis using plutonium to poison Palestinians. But we know the test of the poisoning of Arafat. Mahmoud Abbas doesn't want the fate of Arafat. He knows that. He knows he will be surrounded by Israeli tanks tomorrow if he were to go. I.e., the Palestinian leadership find it very difficult to resist now. Objectively, in reality, it's very difficult to resist on the level of leadership. So you have people resisting in Palestine, but in fact, the leadership is much more constrained. Hamas is besieged by that kind of medieval, almost medieval siege of starvation and malnutrition. The PA is so restricted in terms of maneuver, and it doesn't need permission to do anything. In fact, the Palestinian leadership is much more weaker, fragmented, divided. And we Palestinians don't have the leadership we deserve, by the way. We don't have the caliber of Mandela, or even Mahatma, or Ho Chi Minh, or even Ataturk in Turkey. So I think that our leadership has been quite disappointing, in my opinion. But I can say that because I'm not a diplomat. I do think actually people are actually kind of resisting on their own at the moment. But I'll come to the question whether it's actually, whether the glass is half empty or half full. Is it half empty or half full?
Oh, definitely half full.
Half full. She is very optimistic as a person. And I think it is important to understand actually Israeli strategies. Israeli strategies in 1948, I actually tried to describe in 1948 as elimination, logic of elimination. I wrote a book based on Israeli sources. In 1948, it was logic of elimination because the Jewish community in Palestine was just a third of the population. They had to eliminate the Palestinians, and to some extent, they succeeded to get rid of nearly 1 million Palestinians. Israeli strategy in Oslo is much more complicated than in 1948. Although Israelis actually employ ethnic cleansing in East Jerusalem, and they employ gradual transfer, but in fact, Israeli strategy is much more complicated. It's actually fragmenting the Palestinians. The Palestinians are fragmented. So you have 1.5 million in the Galilee, within the Green Lines. You have 2 million in Gaza. You have the West Bank. You have East Jerusalem. You have the refugees. We have 5 fragments of Palestinians. And the Israeli strategy is also to try to fragment us and to deal with each one bilaterally rather than collectively. The Israeli strategy is also much more complicated. It's not just logic of elimination. They do employ elimination, physical elimination, extrajudicial killing, ethnic cleansing in East Jerusalem, but also they also employ a kind of a colonial imperial system of patron and protege, client to protege. So it's a complicated strategy, the Israeli strategy. Try to get rid of Palestinians, reduce them, maximize Israeli territory, consolidate Israeli majority, if you like, try to create some kind of patronage system, some kind of, if you like, Boutellazes in Palestine, some kind of entity which is kind of doing the Israeli biddings. But I think we mustn't be confused. I think the Palestinian Authority doesn't want to do the Israeli bidding. It's not true to say that the Palestinian leadership wants to play the Israeli game. Arafat didn't want to play the Israeli game. But and Mahmoud Abbas doesn't want to do that. It's not true to say that Mahmoud Abbas would like to have his own state, actually, by the way. He's not. But he is constrained to the degree that he's forced to play the Israeli game, which is under the rules of Oslo. You can't do anything about it. So I think Arafat boxed himself in, made a strategic mistake, really strategic miscalculation, of getting under Israeli control to the West Bank, under Israeli occupation. Once you are under Israeli occupation, as a Palestinian leadership, it's very difficult to resist, actually, from inside. People can resist, but leadership can be eliminated easily. The Israelis target leadership. They can behead leadership, can assassinate, and I do believe that the Israelis also assassinated Arafat. So I think the Palestinian leadership doesn't want to play the Israeli game, but forced to do that because of its actually realities and its dependency on the donor aid and outside. And I think this is something we need to think about in terms of our strategies. So the question is, for us, how much about history? We know Rabin himself in 1948 was involved in the expulsion of Lidda and Ramla personally. 70,000 people, actually. He implemented that order. I mean, as a historian, I wrote a lot about Rabin. 1948, 56, he expelled villages. In 1988, he gave the order to break bones. In 1992, while Rabin was negotiating with the PLO, and he expelled hundreds of Palestinians. He expelled Hamas to South Lebanon. The entire leadership of Hamas was expelled in 1992. So he was negotiating with one group of Palestinians in Oslo with Mahmoud Abbas, and he was expelling another group of Palestinians. People do change. I do think that Israelis can change, or some Israelis can change, but I think Rabin was actually playing that sort of game then, and I think nothing happened much about it. So I think we need to understand Israeli tactics. I think for us Palestinians, the key issue is about empowering ourselves. I think in Oslo we marginalized the refugees. Almost non-actors, the refugees, completely marginalized. The PLO was marginalized. The PLO is based on refugees. I think we need to empower the refugees. We need to give them a voice. We need to allow them to organize. We need to allow them to speak for themselves. We need to empower the Palestinians. We, the Palestinians, have to do it. I think the solidarity people can't do it for us. We, the Palestinians, have to link together. I talked about 5 fragments. These 5 fragments, Gaza, West Bank, East Jerusalem, within the Green Line, we, the Palestinians inside, have to link up together. We can't play the Israeli game. We don't actually start from the Israeli game, actually. We start from the alternative game. We have to have what I call alternative vision, which is uniting ourselves inside and also linking up with the international community. And I do think we need an alternative vision to vision. We don't have a vision. We, the Palestinian leadership, don't have a vision for Palestine. People talk about one-state solution, two-state. In fact, the Palestinian leadership itself doesn't have a vision for Palestine. I think we need to have an alternative to Zionism, not, if you like, mimicking Zionism, not copying Zionism. I think we need to have a vision which says, look, we lived with Jews for centuries. We need to recover that shared heritage of the land. We, the Palestinians, actually need to say the concept of Palestine was was a pluralistic concept. The concept of Palestine is not like the concept of Zion. The concept of Zion was ethno-racial, mono-racial. The concept of Palestine was always pluralistic. That pluralistic tradition, multiple traditions, Christian, Jews, Muslim, living together in East Jerusalem, it was part of our history. We need to recover that concept. We can't say that the idea of Palestine is the same idea like the idea of Zion. It's not the same idea, it's the opposite idea. It's an idea of keeping the pluralism of the country, the heritage of the country. The future of the country has to be shared together, and I think we need that alternative vision. We Palestinians can't just begin to talk about the one-state solution as a kind of magical thing. I actually believe we don't have quick fixes in Palestine. So I know some people want quick solutions. So I'm one of those people actually who can be debating some of these issues with some Israeli friends and this and that. I really believe Palestinians can't have magical solutions. If you want to have a magical solution, you go to a medium. I think mediums actually give you magical solutions. I think Palestinians have to actually to build up their institutions, to link up together. We have to empower the refugees, and we have to start talking to each other. Palestinians in the Galilee have to start talking to and working together with Palestinians actually on the West Bank and Gaza. We have to try to overcome that colonial fragmentation, and also we have to work with the international solidarity movement. In my opinion, the most successful movement on Palestine, on the question of Palestine, was the BDS. It was created 10 years ago. It's still the most phenomenal, influential movement to be created. I remember the early days of that movement 10 years ago. This movement is quite powerful in America. Don't be fooled about Trump and Trump victory. Of course, Trump victory is right-wing shift. We have right-wing shift in America and in Europe. But in fact, the divestment movement in America is quite strong. It's a divestment movement. It's affecting the churches. Every day we have new news, actually. It's affecting Europe. It's affecting the European Parliament, recent European Parliament, actually. Ban actually produces, Israeli produces. It's affecting European supermarkets. It's one of the most effective movements we have. I'm not saying we should actually ignore our friends in governments, and we have plenty of friends in Latin America, in Brazil, perhaps within the Brazilian government. I do think we need to think about a multilateral strategies, not just one front, but many fronts. But we have to think about us also from below. Our strength from below is that BDS movement, and we need to consolidate it. It's beginning to bite. It's affecting them. It's making them, giving them sleepless nights. The Israelis have sleepless nights because of the BDS movement. So I think we need to have that multi-faceted approach to the question of Palestine in terms of, I know the BDS can't lead the Palestinians. Palestinians have to lead themselves inside, but the BDS movement can actually contribute hugely to the question of pressurizing, the question of putting sanctions. The Israelis are not irrational people, by the way. I don't think they are irrational. They do understand pressure, real pressure. So also the good thing about their BDS is that everyone can do it. You don't have to wait for anyone else to do it. You can do it on a local level. You can do it as a student. You can do it as a church. You can do it as a trade unionist. I think it actually is. So I think, is the glass half empty or is it half full? I actually tend to think it is actually half full.
Rather reluctantly.
Is it because I'm optimistic? Maybe by nature I'm optimistic. Is it because I actually look at long terms, actually? People who look at short terms, they say, well, there's the Brexit in London, there's right-wing shift. It's true, there's right-wing populism, there's fascism in some places, there's a Trump and this and that. Those people actually who see things actually in short terms tend to despair. And I think maybe because I'm a historian, I see things actually long-term, you know, kind of maybe generations, maybe even centuries, maybe this and that. I think I actually believe that, you know, the human being actually can change and things can change. So I think that I believe the glass is half full internationally. I think internationally we are in a much better shape now than 10 years ago. I remember 10 years ago, I remember 20 years ago, 30 years ago when I went to London, no one mentioned the word Palestine. 30 years ago when I came to do my PhD in London, no one mentioned the word. People thought Palestine is the PLO, is terrorism, this and that. Now people actually discuss about it. We have a lot of support on the popular level, and we have a movement which is actually growing and building up. On the ground, things are much more complicated. Things are much more complicated on the Palestinian leadership. But on the ground, people are still, you know, when you go to Palestine, you have still people actually still we are building up institutions, we're building up universities, we're building up trade unions. We're not actually passive. We have never been passive victims. And I think the message from a Palestinian to you as solidarity that we are not going to give up and we will never give up. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Masalha. I'm sure you keep your questions. We will afford you a good 40 minutes to exchange ideas and question the speakers. Before I hand over to Professor Clemesha, just one observation. It's a saying in Arabic, it's often said with regard to Palestine that rights are never lost as long as the person who lost it seeks those rights. And this is, it really symbolizes, you know, the Palestinian struggle. They have never given up the search to restore, to regain those rights which were taken decades ago. And it is for this reason their struggle continues today. I'm sure you would come back to the speakers, Noor and Ben, and of course Professor Clemesha, but I hand you over to her right now.
Bom, vou mudar o idioma, né? Então, muito obrigada, Daud, e os palestrantes que me precederam. Bom, eu vou falar uma coisa para vocês. No lugar de vocês, eu não ia querer me ouvir depois da palestra do Noor, entendeu? Eu queria... Mas eu acho que eu tenho uma obrigação aqui, na qualidade de professora dessa casa, de contar um pouco a experiência nossa aqui na USP. Em primeiro lugar, lembrar muito rapidamente, e eu vou ser breve, porque a gente tem muito que ainda dialogar com a mesa, com os nossos convidados, para ter essa interação entre estudiosos que estão vindo de fora, palestinos em Londres, inglês, enfim, e aqui com nós no Brasil. Bom, quando eu comecei a estudar na USP, isso foi em 91, foi quando eu entrei aqui no Departamento de História, não havia qualquer curso de História árabe, muito menos História palestina. Bom, na verdade, ainda não tem disciplina de História árabe nessa casa, né? Mas a USP criou, e muito por iniciativa do Departamento de Letras Orientais, especificamente do curso de árabe, e dentro de um contexto que foi a invasão do Líbano em 2006, e sob o impacto desse contexto, e sob o espanto de ver que uma universidade como a USP, que é a maior universidade sul-americana, a segunda maior latino-americana, não tinha uma disciplina, uma cadeira de História árabe, não tinha, até então, uma cadeira de Filosofia árabe. E o curso de árabe resolveu, conseguindo batalhar, sabe como é difícil, os fundos, os meios são escassos, mas pela abertura de claros, ou seja, da possibilidade de abrir concursos e contratar docentes, resolveu, então, abrir a possibilidade de contratar um professor de filosofia árabe e contratar, né, fazer abrir espaço para que houvesse história árabe dentro dessa universidade. Então, hoje, História Árabe está no curso de Letras, né? E eu, até hoje, penando, estudando árabe, né? Porque no curso de Letras, historiadora, as pessoas estranham, mas a minha formação é aqui, nessa casa. E fico muito contente de ver todos os estudantes de letras que são arabistas em formação, muitos dos quais estão combinando estudos árabes com história. Isso é o mais difícil. Quer dizer, uma coisa é você ter um historiador, a outra coisa é você ter o arabista, mas a combinação requer muito estudo, requer muito empenho, requer intercâmbios, requer uma série de medidas que a gente começa a implementar, né? Só para me adiantar um pouco, eu fazer um salto, mas recentemente estabelecemos um acordo entre a FEFELESH e a Universidade de Al-Quds, ou seja, a Universidade de Jerusalém, a Universidade Árabe de Jerusalém. Lamentavelmente, não conseguimos enviar nenhum estudante para lá, porque o único que chegou a ser selecionado, e tem toda uma série de critérios, não pôde viajar, porque Israel não concede visto de estudante para qualquer um que queira estudar numa universidade palestina. Então, esse estudante ele ficou com receio de ter que passar 3 meses com visto de turista, depois ter que sair da fronteira para voltar à fronteira, e mesmo com todo o apoio que recebemos do nosso escritório de representação em Ramallah, e a certeza de que estaria amparado, o estudante em si ficou com medo. Né? Ele não quis passar por essa dificuldade, e o nosso setor de cooperação internacional também teve receio de perder uma bolsa, de falar, nós vamos investir na passagem, todo mês vai receber, no mínimo, $500, eu não sei quanto, é uma subsistência mínima, mas, enfim, e será que ele vai poder completar o semestre? Será que ele vai perder o semestre? Será que vai ser expulso? Será que vai ser exilado? Será que vai poder entrar? Ou será que ele vai ter o azar de ser barrado na entrada? Então, tudo isso dificultou muito. E esse tipo de cooperação é necessário. Mas temos também acordos com institutos no Cairo, em Beirute, que têm possibilitado né, avançar nos estudos árabes nessa universidade. E fico muito contente de ver aqui pessoas que estão se formando, já se formaram, passando por nosso curso, e que têm desenvolvido especificamente estudos em História árabe. Né? Então, a mestranda que defendeu a tese sobre o vilarejo, Cacum, né, e que tem uma grande importância dentro desses estudos. Outra que estuda, nesse momento, a relação entre o movimento de solidariedade à Palestina e o movimento das mulheres na Palestina, que esteve lá, participou desses agrupamentos, estudantes que estão estudando cinema palestino ou que estão estudando a história da Palestina, e tudo isso dentro de um enfoque mesmo de olhar para a história, como o professor Nur já muito bem colocou, como uma necessidade de compreender o passado e com a absoluta necessidade de resgatar a verdade, os fatos, os documentos, né, toda essa construção do passado e do presente. Bom, e quem sabe um olhar para o futuro, como já foi dito. Agora, dentro dessa minha rápida fala, eu quero só dizer o seguinte, que trata-se, como já foi muito bem exposto aqui, de um caso evidente, claro, de colonialismo, que produziu vários fenômenos, mas vários, e que mudaram ao longo dos últimos 100 anos, né, atingiram diferentes roupagens, mas uma constante. Esse colonialismo, que não se difere em muitos aspectos de outras formas de colonialismo que aconteceram no mundo e na história, esse colonialismo produziu, e ainda produz, uma constante que é uma divisão, uma segregação que avança, que se aprofundiza na região. Uma divisão, em primeiro lugar, entre terras, né, destacando o país Palestina, evidente não Estado, a região da Palestina, destacando ela da região do Oriente Médio, isso na Primeira Guerra Mundial, com toda a diplomacia secreta, resultado da Conferência de Paz de Paris, criação dos mandatos britânico da Palestina, Transjordânia, Iraque, assim por diante. Ou seja, primeiro, esse colonialismo destaca, segrega, separa a Palestina do restante da região, forçando aqui o movimento palestino, a resistência palestina, que já existe nesse momento, seja uma resistência separada do que era a da Síria, por exemplo, né? E que até então, até a Primeira Guerra Mundial, não havia tanta separação entre movimentos de resistência, os congressos pan-árabes, os congressos árabes na época, os congressos nacionalistas árabes da época, eram congressos regionais. Divide a Palestina. Em seguida, e com o passar do tempo e das fases desse conflito, a própria Palestina, enquanto território cujas fronteiras a gente pode entender hoje como aquelas do mandato britânico da Palestina, por exemplo, começa a subdividir mais e mais. Em 47, o traçado da divisão que a ONU vota e aprova em 29 de novembro de 47, que dá origem a essa data que hoje lembramos, não era de forma alguma o traçado que hoje existe. Em 67 se dividiu um pouco mais. Então, essas subdivisões vão crescendo ao longo dos últimos 100 anos, dividindo a Palestina em 3, 4 porções, e entre as pessoas, porque começa dividindo aquilo que, por exemplo, os irmãos Lumière tinham visto de uma forma e com olhos completamente diferentes do que hoje qualquer pessoa que vá para lá enxergue, porque os irmãos Lumière, quando tiveram no finalzinho do século XIX, passagem para o fim, filmaram a Palestina. E os seus olhos buscaram nas ruas da Palestina judeus, muçulmanos, cristãos, uma diversidade que estava coexistindo, coabitando aquela terra. Foi isso que captou o olhar e que a gente vê nos registros fílmicos que existem daquela época. E dividiu, em primeiro lugar, os palestinos que não eram judeus dos judeus da Palestina. Essa foi a primeira divisão que o movimento sionista causou dentro desse território. E aí começa a dividir os palestinos dos demais árabes, num passo seguinte, 1916, 17, 18, e aí, finalmente, a dividir os palestinos em que hoje são 100 grupos, que já foram, 5 grupos, desculpa, que já foram lembrados aqui. Os palestinos de Israel, 20% da população, da Cisjordânia, que é incomunicável com aqueles da faixa de Gaza, de Jerusalém Oriental, que também Ben White já lembrou status dos palestinos de Jerusalém Oriental, enquanto residentes, né, residentes numa condição extremamente frágil e cientes, todo dia tornados cientes da sua própria instabilidade e temporalidade, e possibilidade de ter revogado esse status de cidadãos. E, finalmente, a metade da população palestina, né, que são os palestinos da diáspora. Então, lembrar que, quando a gente fala da Palestina, a gente está falando de uma sociedade que está e que tem o próprio desterro, né, como parte da sua condição, do seu dia a dia. Portanto, o que esse movimento de 100 anos vem evidenciando é uma tentativa de concretizar, de diferentes formas, o próprio mito do não-povo palestino. Né? O próprio mito que foi repetido de diferentes maneiras, por Golda Meir, por esse e por aquele, de que os palestinos não existem, de que os palestinos não constituem um povo, se é que existem como pessoas, não são povo, e se são povo, finalmente, lhes é negado direitos, porque hoje, a atual situação do mito do não-povo palestino é a implementação dos não-direitos, ou seja, a negação dos seus direitos, onde quer que eles estejam dessas 5 regiões. Né? Isso nada mais é do que a mais nova forma de manifestação dessa realidade. E, finalmente, mais do que uma realidade de não-direitos, de não acesso, de não ter os seus direitos garantidos nas diferentes situações, mas a gente ainda vê o problema aqui internacionalmente, da dificuldade que é o palestino ou o movimento de solidariedade palestino ter o direito de reivindicar os direitos palestinos. Isso lhe é extraído. A possibilidade de reivindicar os direitos palestinos. Ele é silenciado antes de conseguir fazer isso, muitas vezes. Por exemplo, não se concebe criar uma mesa de um evento onde não haja um israelense para falar depois que o palestino fale. Não estou falando desse evento, porque esse evento não é um evento acadêmico. Mas quando a gente está num movimento de solidariedade ou passa por diferentes instâncias, não se aceita praticamente que um palestino fale sem colocar um israelense para falar em seguida. Será que não é possível entender o palestino por si? Será que o palestino não é um ser que pode ter seus direitos defendidos? Será que a sua existência é condicionada pela existência de ter um israelense para colocar essa realidade enquanto fato? Né? Então, do não-povo ao não-direito é um percurso que a gente viu essa história percorrer e, no final das contas, ela é a expressão máxima da condição colonial da Palestina. O colonialismo, ao longo da história, é uma história de ausência de direitos, de negação de direitos, baseado na negação da humanidade, daquele objeto, povo, né? Daquele outro povo. Essa é a história e essa é a essência do colonialismo, é negar a humanidade daquele com que se trata e que pode assumir diferentes formas. No século XXI, é impossível você dizer que o palestino não exista, mas a sua voz vai ser tolhida, o seu direito de se defender vai ser tolhido. Ele vai ser visto, em última instância, dentro da mais nova roupagem que o velho orientalismo do século XVIII, XIX assume, ele vai ser visto como terrorista, segundo, por exemplo, a ideia do choque de civilizações e assim por diante. Tudo isso ajudando a criar essa narrativa e essa camisa de força. Para se somar essa camisa de força que o palestino já precisa enfrentar, você tem problemas internos, evidentemente, que eu não vou abordar aqui, porque a gente precisa abrir a mesa para debates, mas problemas que estão relacionados a essa realidade, mas que passam, por exemplo, pela divisão da liderança, das lideranças palestinas. O problema é esse que já foi mencionado aqui pelo Nur Masalha. Portanto, reconhecer a condição colonial, e com isso eu quero começar a finalizar, significa olhar para várias partes fragmentadas, 5 como foram expostas, e olhar reconhecendo que isso se trata de uma condição com várias características particulares, mas que se trata de um só, e que a divisão é a operação do colonialismo, não é a realidade por si. E o que fazer, né, dentro dessa realidade? Em primeiro lugar, saber que o atual estágio de entender que há um movimento por criação de 2 Estados pode não ser aquele que venha se concretizar. Ou seja, estar aberto a olhar para essa realidade colonial significa olhar, e com todo o seu significado, que eu tentei rapidamente expor, significa olhar, em primeiro lugar, para a necessidade de, mais do que defender 2 Estados, ou defender um Estado único, ou defender qualquer fórmula que hoje parece cada uma mais longínqua com a outra, defender a possibilidade do palestino defender seus direitos. Né? E isso significa também algo que a sociedade civil brasileira conhece muito bem. Movimentos por direitos, movimentos por se colocar dentro da solidariedade, da compreensão, é algo que a sociedade civil brasileira vem fazendo, e vem fazendo em relação à Palestina, quando participa de várias iniciativas, como o EAPPI, que é o Programa de Acompanhamentos Acompanhadores Ecumênicos em Israel e Palestina. Tem vários aqui que já participaram. Tem a FIP, que surgiu nos Estados Unidos e foi criada aqui no Brasil, e que também leva jovens aqui da universidade, da sociedade, para aprender e trocar experiências na Palestina. Então, tem toda uma atuação de brasileiros, que é uma atuação da sociedade civil, que tem, eu acho que pode, sim, se orgulhar do Brasil ter mantido uma posição enquanto Estado de solidariedade com a Palestina, dentro também de certas camisas de força, que, por exemplo, a posição histórica de princípios do Brasil é uma posição de equidistância, é uma posição de tentativa de equilíbrios entre dois lados, que, paulatinamente, tem se somado a uma posição de um maior engajamento do Brasil no Oriente Médio, maior interesse e uma maior autonomia nas suas votações em diversos conselhos, instâncias, instituições, órgãos internacionais. Então, há uma evolução da posição brasileira, sem abandonar princípios que são históricos, mas que pode também passar por um enfoque no reconhecimento do que são esses direitos de uma sociedade dividida, mas que é uma sociedade só. Né? Então, o governo brasileiro não deixa, de certa forma, também de ter uma influência e uma reciprocidade com o que a sociedade brasileira vem fazendo de forma individual, quando viaja para trabalhar numa ONG, no movimento de base na Palestina, ou de maneira coletiva, quando cria o Fórum Social Mundial Palestina, que aconteceu em Porto Alegre não faz muito tempo, e com tantas iniciativas que saem daí. Né? Finalmente, esse enfoque por direitos é um enfoque que liberta das amarras, dessa camisa de força, realmente das concepções. Porque, quando conseguir o movimento palestino, por si só, a sua resistência dentro do território, junto com o movimento de solidariedade internacional, mas sempre o movimento palestino liderando o caminho, as suas decisões, mostrando para o mundo o que quer, a que veio, o que precisa, né, e tendo a resposta da sociedade, da comunidade internacional, inclusive, esse enfoque por direitos pode significar que, no final, o panorama pode ser algo muito diferente do que qualquer coisa que a gente tenha concebido até agora, porque, de fato, o Oriente Médio, em transformação, deixa essa abertura. Aliás, não há como prescindir dela, a realidade é uma região em definição, uma região que pode ir para diversos lados, e acho que, inclusive, lutar por direitos na região, por parte dos palestinos e dos movimentos de solidariedade, pode até mesmo trazer a criação de um Estado, porque conceder direitos por parte de Israel a toda uma população dentro da Cisjordânia, da faixa de Gaza, que venha a reclamar direitos perante o Estado de Israel, numa visão de conjunto, pode acabar levando esse Estado a achar mais favorável criar logo um Estado palestino, do que ter que conceder cidadania, conceder voto, conceder infraestrutura, conceder uma série de medidas do tipo que são os direitos humanos, os direitos cívicos e, por que não, né, por mais que o nacionalismo tenha fracassado até esse momento, até mesmo, se assim desejarem, os seus direitos nacionais na região. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Arlene, for this enlightening presentation. I'm sure you've been waiting patiently to raise your questions to the various speakers, so I'll open the floor immediately. Anyone who wants to raise a question to any of the speakers, please raise your hand and we'll pass the mic to you. Yes, sir. Kader, welcome. There's a gentleman. I'll come to you next. Kaderi. Yes, please. That's all right. That's okay.
Yes, because of the translators, we need them to speak at the mic.
Yeah.
السلام عليكم. Eu queria fazer minha pergunta ao professor Nur, que, dentre muitas coisas que ele me falou aqui, e ele, como não é político, ele é historiador, ele pode falar, e a gente que está na política também pode perguntar. Uma observação que quero fazer é a respeito do Hamas, a Autoridade Palestina. Porque hoje o povo palestino jamais, na sua história, deixou de resistir, em nenhum momento. E resiste até hoje e resistirá. Inclusive, os mortos enterrados na Palestina são uma resistência à ocupação. Mas o que mais me preocupa é que, além do inimigo ocupante, que está todos os dias usurpando todos os direitos do povo palestino, tem uma autoridade palestina que é conivente. Ela é parceira dessa ocupação. Se não, vejamos, nessa última intifada, onde a autoridade palestina diz que não, e a entrevista de Abbas na Globo News aqui, diz que ele não tem nenhuma vergonha de dizer que é parceiro da segurança de Israel. Nesse sentido, acaba inibindo o povo que luta contra uma ocupação e fazendo com que esse mesmo povo tenha que lutar contra uma outra ocupação, a ocupação de uma autoridade que não dá nem o direito à resistência. Então, eu queria que ele falasse mais sobre isso, porque quando ele fala que a base está amarrado a Oslo, ele está amarrado a Oslo, mas ele tem que desamarrar da ocupação sionista, porque Oslo não lhe diz que ele tem obrigação de reprimir seu povo em detrimento dessa ocupação sionista. Então, eu queria ouvir dele isso aí. Um exemplo clássico também, a eleição da Universidade de Birzeit. A vitória da oposição à autoridade palestina lhe permite ir lá prender os estudantes que ganharam as eleições. Então, eu queria que falasse disso aí.
Questions, maybe? Yeah.
We have another one, please. Yes. You have to speak for the translators. They need you to speak in the mic for the translation.
I want to know, I visited in July 72, the whole region, except for the Golan Hills.
Can you speak in the mic, please? Yeah. Thank you.
First of all, I'm French, and I visited in July 72. In July, the whole region, Palestine and Israel. The only place I could not visit was the Golan Hills because of the conflict with Syria. I would like to know, and I hope so, can we someday say salam, shalom? I hope so, because the Palestinians never give up.
One last question before I ask the speakers to respond. Yes, sir.
Bom dia a todos. Bem-vindos ao Brasil, os três. Queria perguntar para o Ben a opinião dele sobre a campanha de BDS e sobre os acontecimentos dentro do Partido Trabalhista Britânico com relação à perseguição contra apoiadores da causa palestina. Queria perguntar para o professor Nur a opinião dele sobre este ano. Nós acompanhamos a ida de Mahmoud Abbas ao funeral de Shimon Peres, que, eu acredito, é um criminoso de guerra, é um criminoso contra o povo palestino. Queria conhecer sua opinião sobre esta questão. Além disso, queria lhe perguntar sobre a questão da Revolução Síria, que tem sido um divisor de águas dentro do próprio movimento palestino. Qual é a vossa opinião? E, por fim, recentemente, nós vimos a decisão do governo libanês de construir um muro ao redor de um campo de refugiados palestinos na cidade de Saida, em Hilwi. Queria saber também a sua opinião sobre isso. Por fim, queria deixar um pedido para o senhor que nos ajude a publicar as suas obras aqui no Brasil, porque realmente, com relação aos historiadores palestinos, infelizmente, o Brasil está em dívida, está numa dívida muito grande. Nós não temos nada em português do senhor, não temos nada de Walid Khalid, e mesmo de historiadores israelenses que têm uma posição de crítica contundente contra o Estado de Israel, contra o sionismo, como Ilan Pappé, não temos nenhum. Vamos ter agora, em 15 dias, vai ter pela primeira vez um livro do Ilan Pappé publicado em português. Então, queria pedir sua ajuda para que a gente possa, realmente, o ano que vem, ter um livro seu publicado aqui no Brasil para oferecer uma outra perspectiva sobre os estudos sobre a questão palestina.
I mean, I think they kind of well, thank you for having me here, and I think it's a kind of a great opportunity for me to try to listen, to come learn from people here in Brazil, and I think we can kind of learn from each other in a way. That's an important thing, you know. It's not that I know everything about what to do and what to do next, but I think that exchange is extremely important. That dialogue between solidarity and Palestinians is an important thing. Again, I actually want to take you back actually to the question of Arafat. I'm not here to condemn Arafat or condemn Mahmoud Abbas. This is not my objective here to do that. My objective is to try to understand how individuals actually make decisions and how these decisions have implications for generations and how mistakes can actually be mistakes for generations also. And I think what happened in 1992, Mahmoud Abbas personally negotiated Oslo, personally. Arafat put his name to it, but it was really Mahmoud Abbas behind the secret negotiations, and he wrote a book called The Secret Oslo, The Secret Channels of Oslo. See, he really was the person actually involved in the details. And Arafat was, he wasn't a man of details, by the way. He didn't read much, actually. He was a man of rhetoric. He was a man of charisma, enormous amount of charisma, enormous amount of strength, enormous character. But in fact, he looked very little at the details and the maps. And the Israelis presented maps, and instead of actually studying these maps correctly, actually, kind of wishful thinking. I think we Palestinians can't do this amateur approach anymore. We have to think strategically. And I think one thing about the Israeli military, they do plan strategically, but, and I think one thing Arafat did in 1992, it is a turning point for me as a Palestinian, trying to understand why we are here, why are we stuck now, why aren't we moving on this front? Because if we had a different leadership like the leadership of Mandela, Mandela made a different decision. He was approached in prison by Botha, and Botha said, can you do X, Y, and Z? Mandela said, I'm not prepared to do that. Take it or leave it. His decision was quite strategic, and he wasn't prepared. We the Palestinians, actually, the Palestinian leadership, the PLO made a strategic decision in the 70s and 80s to take 20% of Palestine. They already made that compromise. The minute the PLO decided on the Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, from the 70s onwards, I remember this history actually, that compromise was already there. The PLO made the compromise, we will go for 20%, not 100%. So he already made that compromise. The PLO had nothing to lose in 1992. Why do you need to make more? You have already given up 80%. You've already made that strategic mistake. Arafat didn't have to come into Palestine as a subservient. He can become as a proud Palestinian, as a leader, as equal. He didn't come as an equal. He came as someone who is subordinate. And that's the strategic mistake. He also almost marginalized the PLO. He almost disbanded the PLO. The PLO hasn't functioned since 1992. This was the international legitimate voice of the Palestinians. Where is the PLO? The PLO of the UN, the PLO which Brazil recognized, talked to, the PLO, everyone. We didn't have, the PA was created by Oslo, under Oslo conditions. So we gave up on the most important leadership of the Palestinians, which was the PLO. We had no leadership. We had nothing which unites us all. And so he came under conditions which are not equal. Arafat recognized Israel in 1993. Israel recognized nothing. Nothing, absolutely nothing. Arafat met an awful lot of Israelis in the 70s and 80s. Liberal Israelis, good-meaning Israelis. Some of them I know. Some of them I met in Jerusalem. Some of them I talked to. Those people told him, if only you recognize Israel, everything will be sorted. Nothing was sorted after 93. Arafat fell into that kind of wishful thinking. Politics is not about wishful thinking. It's about thinking, not wishful thinking. Thinking, planning, strategically. Thinking about the consequences of what you're doing. I'm a historian who kind of trying to analyze what politicians are doing, leadership. And I think we make these kind of fundamental mistakes, actually. I remember some of the people, some of the Palestinians in Ramallah who negotiated with the Israelis, they actually told me personally, Arafat didn't read the maps. The Israelis gave him maps and he just dismissed them. It's that kind of haphazard, that kind of amateur approach, actually. And we know the Israelis are into details. The details are there. So we stuck with Oslo, and Oslo became part of international law. Instead of, we had endless UN resolutions in favor of Palestine, about 60 of them. Where are they? Where are they gone? You know, they're still there. We need to recover that legitimacy. It's an international legitimacy. It's a major asset for us, I think, to do. So this is my message to you.
So the question was about BDS and about what's been happening in the Labour Party in the UK in terms of a crackdown on pro-Palestinian activity. I won't talk too much about BDS now because I know it will be addressed in a subsequent panel in more detail. Suffice to say that personally speaking, I of course support BDS in its entirety. As a writer, I'm a signatory to a cultural boycott declaration in the UK, and I've seen how it's grown a lot in Britain, in trade unions, university campuses, faith communities, many different contexts. And I think probably one of its strongest sort of strategic merits is that it's closely tied to the reality of what Israel is doing, and it gives people something to do about that. And the reason why Israel hates it so much is because A, it's been a galvanizing force for solidarity in general, but also it's about accountability and an end to impunity. And Israel is happy to talk forever as long as there isn't actual accountability for what it does. And just with respect to the Labour Party, it's a bit of a complicated story, but you could say there's maybe three different elements of what's happened there. Firstly, you've got the entirely expected opposition of reactionary elements in British politics to a left-wing Labour leader like Jeremy Corbyn. You also have the entirely expected opposition of people within the Labour Party from the centre or the centre-right to someone like Jeremy Corbyn. So those two groups, are always or have been looking for ways to undermine his leadership. And then the third element is a longer-standing efforts by the Israeli government and pro-Israel lobby groups to undermine Palestine solidarity activism and actually to equate Palestine solidarity activism with anti-Semitism, and also sort of tied up within that to make certain topics taboo or off limits. So, for example, the idea that Zionism can only be discussed as purely the self-determination of the Jewish people, and it cannot be discussed in terms of what it has meant for the Palestinian people, which has been the big sort of absence within discussions in Britain, at least. So those three things have sort of came together in terms of what's happened within the Labour Party. But what I would say is, personally, is that although the discussion about Zionism and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and Palestine solidarity, although all of those discussions in Britain over the last year or so most of them have been characterized by this perspective that completely excludes Palestinian voices and experiences. Nevertheless, it has created an opportunity to discuss things that in general, I actually think that Israel supporters prefer not to have discussed. Because for a long time, support for Zionism was sort of a kind of, such a sort of given that you wouldn't even talk about it. Well, now it is actually debated, and it's debated in American newspapers, and it's debated on campuses and that sort of thing. And like Netanyahu's demand that the Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state, the attempt to silence and stifle legitimate discussion and critique of Zionism actually brings out into the open and creates an opportunity to have a critical and radical discussion that might otherwise not have taken place.
Thank you. Before I hand over, and before I come to you at the floor, just a point of interest here that in 1975, the General Assembly did vote unanimously that Zionism is a form of racism equivalent to or akin to apartheid. That resolution was rescinded several years later after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when the United States became the sole global power, superpower, and in alliance or collusion with the Zionists managed to rescind that resolution. I think it is imperative that, you know, the solidarity movement today and the diplomatic community, countries like Brazil, that aspire for a seat on the Security Council, reopen the debate on this question of racism and Zionism. It's linked to racism and apartheid in particular. I think this is the way forward in terms of the international solidarity movement. Another point to note is that when the idea of this conference occurred to us, and this is the second of its kind, it was because of the solidarity shown from Latin American countries and the people of Latin America for Palestine. In the aftermath of the war in 2008, 2009, 2012 and 2014, several countries in Latin America recalled their ambassadors. Some, like Venezuela and Bolivia, severed ties with Israel. And it was in an attempt to build upon this support in Latin America that we convened the first conference in London last year, in which several people from some in the audience attended. So we hope that this conference would continue to gather momentum, not just at the official level, not just within academia, but also within the general public, whose opinion and whose attitude will say a lot and will determine how, you know, this struggle unfolds. And here we speak about the BDS. We know it has a presence here in Brazil and in several parts of Latin America. I take, sorry?
Okay, I just want to say something about apartheid and settler colonialism, because I was asked this question many times before. Is it the same thing? Are we talking about the same thing when we talk about settler colonialism and apartheid? And also the same question, is the situation in Palestine similar to the situation in South Africa? People will ask you this question. And I think these are good questions, in my opinion. And I think there are features in South Africa which we don't have in Palestine. And there are features in Palestine which we didn't have in South Africa. But we have also common features in both cases. And also, I think if you actually talk to South African leaders, some of them say that the situation in Palestine is actually far more difficult than the situation in South Africa because of the ethnic cleansing of settler colonialism, because the Zionists actually wanted to push people out, and the South Africans, the Afrikaners, the Dutch Afrikaners wanted to exploit people. In fact, actually, the Zionist strategies of ethnic cleansing made the situation for the Palestinians much more difficult in Palestine. I think some South Africans which we met in Palestine, last year I had a conference with a large number of people. Some of them actually, we took them around the country and they said the situation actually in South Africa was much easier or much better because the situation in Palestine much more difficult because of the Israeli strategies constantly trying to push people out. So don't be fooled by this idea that somehow the West Bank and Gaza are somehow better than Soweto. Things are much, much tougher. And I think the word apartheid is an appropriate word to use in the case of Palestine. It doesn't mean that they are identical. It means there are a great deal of similarities, and I think we need to keep hammering this message about how Israeli apartheid is the real issue here.
I'll hand you again for Les, please.
Bom dia. Eu vim de Belo Horizonte especialmente para essa conferência e estou muito feliz de tê-lo feito. Espero que um dia a gente possa ter uma conferência assim lá. Minha pergunta é para o professor Masalha. Ele falou sobre nacionalismo, sobre fragmentação. E eu queria saber se, com a segregação do povo palestino em tantos grupos, mas olhando aqui especificamente para Gaza e Cisjordânia, se você percebe uma propagação de visões competidoras de nacionalismo saindo desses territórios propagadas pelos grupos em poder lá, e através das artes, da mídia e de outros meios, e se sim, quais são as consequências para esse tipo específico de divisão para a causa palestina? Obrigada.
Bom dia, meu nome é Bruno. Eu tenho uma pergunta para o Ben White, mas se o professor Masalha quiser responder, muito bem-vindo também. Ben, eu queria saber, a partir dessa exposição que você fez sobre as dinâmicas de expulsão, segregação que a gente enxerga em Palestina e Israel, quais aproximações, a partir do que você conhece do que acontece no Brasil, dinâmicas parecidas, principalmente no Rio de Janeiro, mas também em São Paulo, quais aproximações você acha que é possível a gente fazer com o que acontece aqui no Brasil, mas também com dinâmicas que podem acontecer, por exemplo, em Londres, em cidades de países desenvolvidos, mas também em contextos de países subdesenvolvidos, dinâmicas parecidas nos contextos urbanos de segregação, expulsão, que permitem fazer conexões que acontecem num contexto bastante colonial, como é o contexto da Palestina e Israel.
Obrigada. Bom dia. Primeiro, quero saudar a mesa, saudar este evento, saudar a Arlene, em nome da organização do evento, e dizer da minha felicidade de ver um historiador palestino na mesa, né? Sem nenhum demérito a outros historiadores, e tem novos historiadores israelenses importantes, como Ilan Pape, que a gente espera trazer para o Brasil, mas é difícil a gente ver trazerem historiadores palestinos que há muito tempo falam sobre Nakba, sobre limpeza étnica, sobre o conceito de transferência. Eu li o seu livro, infelizmente esqueci de trazer. Usei o seu livro no meu mestrado, né, que a Arlene citou, obrigada, né, citou que foi um mestrado sobre a aldeia de Cacum, né, de 48, destruída em 48, a aldeia da minha família, do meu pai, e fico bastante feliz de se dar voz, como a Arlene falou, para os palestinos. Então, queria saudar primeiro a organização do evento por permitir isso para nós. Em segundo lugar, dizer que, como foi comentado agora, eu espero que a gente um dia possa fazer um seminário como esse dentro da Palestina, mas não sobre esse assunto, logicamente, mas sobre a reconstrução dessa Palestina, né, com essa tradição pluralista que estava nas histórias do meu pai, pequenininho, criança, e que é o que nós defendemos, né, dentro dessa Palestina livre, em que todos possam finalmente viver em paz, né, com direitos iguais. Agora, nessa questão de reconstruir essa tradição pluralista e uma Palestina histórica, que é o que nós defendemos e acreditamos como uma solução justa que contemple toda a sociedade palestina fragmentada, esses 5 grupos que o senhor citou, eu acredito que essa é a única possibilidade de contemplar uma solução justa para todas essas pessoas, um Estado único, laico, livre, democrático, com direitos iguais para todos que queiram viver em paz com os palestinos. Uma questão importante, eu queria saber, e nós não temos nenhum problema com conviver com as pessoas, lógico, com judeus, muçulmanos, cristãos, que essa é a tradição da Palestina, mas eu queria saber como é que ficam os criminosos contra a humanidade. Na minha opinião, eles têm que ser julgados por um tribunal internacional especial, para que, finalmente, a gente possa ter esse contexto de uma Palestina para uma solução justa e que todos possam viver com direitos humanos iguais, né, na Palestina histórica. Gostaria que o senhor comentasse sobre isso. Por fim, sobre Oslo. Eu acho que não foi abordado aqui a questão econômica em relação a Oslo. Tem um autor muito importante, que é o Adam Hani, que até recentemente foi proibido de entrar na Palestina, né? E que ele fala sobre isso, sobre a dependência econômica integral da autoridade palestina, né? E como se formou uma nova classe capitalista a partir desse projeto. Então, eu gostaria eu não vejo como um equívoco, mas eu acho que a política ela não tem ingênuos, né? Então, eu acho que, como dizia Eduardo Said, Oslo é o Tratado de Versalhes da causa palestina, uma segunda Nakba, e intencional. Então, eu gostaria que o senhor comentasse sobre essa questão econômica, que está muito clara nos protocolos de Paris e que leva ao quadro que nós temos hoje, né? E a subserviência de Abbas, inclusive, e no velório do Shimon Peres, um assassino, né, dos palestinos. Obrigada.
Okay, so I will speak to this question in the middle. And, well, first of all, I confess that I'm partly reluctant to make a lot of comparisons, or comparisons where I don't feel confident in knowledge or experience about the other situations. But suffice to say, patterns of racial segregation and colonization and the segregation of space, you know, on the divisions of class and race, are of course replicated in different modes everywhere, including in the UK, including in Brazil. And we also see a lot of kind of other similarities or aspects replicated, such as the militarization of police forces or the use of surveillance and so forth. And what I do know from having seen this is that there is cross-pollination of solidarity from groups who recognize patterns in their own experience with what the Palestinians have experienced. So for a long time now, of course, you've had delegations from the MST going from Brazil to Palestine. You have, of course, more recently, the Black Lives Matter platform in the USA, which included explicit solidarity with the Palestinian struggle, recognizing the experiences past and present that the Palestinians are going through, pointing out similarities and things like that. And an example that came to mind in the UK context, which was actually focused around a particular solidarity campaign, was the campaign targeted against G4S, the security company, a BDS boycott campaign. And in the context of Britain, you had like a partnership between groups who work to defend the rights of non-documented persons, right, who work to defend the rights of asylum seekers and immigrants, because the UK government has been using G4S as a security contractor for the detention and removal of illegals. And of course, Palestine solidarity activists who have been campaigning against G4S because of their role in the Israeli prison service and the torture and detention of Palestinians. So you do see, particularly when it comes to solidarity and activism, increasingly, I would say, groups from different countries who see and bring to the table their own experiences with systematic oppression, institutionalized discrimination, forced displacement, and things like that. And you see this kind of linkage taking place, which is a linkage of solidarity.
Yeah. I actually think we can learn from similarities, but also we can learn from differences. For instance, actually in the UK, we have a certain amount of social racism, but we don't have legal racism. 10 years ago, people were debating institutionalized racism in the police. Some people debate institutional racism against homosexuals today, but that's different from legal racism. And I think in the question of Israel, legal racism in the law, it's a big feature. Really, we have dozens and dozens of Israeli laws which forbids Palestinians from buying land or access to land or acquiring their own land. Dozens and dozens of laws. Really, I mean, this is something quite extraordinary. We have laws in Israel which are against commemorating the Nakba. The legal side of Israeli racism is not just institutionalized side. Remember, legal side is very powerful. The law is very powerful. And the law is something the Israelis actually use to legitimize, confiscate land, establish power. So the question of tackling power against racism, racism is about power, there's no question about it. There's a lot of prejudice. But once you put power and prejudice together, it becomes a powerful thing, actually. So the question of power, the law is a very powerful thing in the Israeli system. And you can't analyze Israeli racism without looking at the legalized things. And liberal Israelis discuss this openly, by the way. The Israeli laws, dozens and dozens of laws which restrict Palestinian access to the land within the Green Line, it's not talking about the West Bank, to about 7% of the land. And they are legislated legally, democratically. So here where democracy is actually used to try to consolidate racism. In the UK, there is a certain amount of social racism, but I don't think there's legal racism. In America, there is a certain amount of institutional segregation. So I think we need to learn from these differences. I think meeting people, Black Lives Mattering in America is an important thing for me because I did actually learn quite a lot from them in terms of social segregation and in terms of institutionalized racism in the American police. The police can actually be institutionally racist, and I think they're shooting black people actually, there's a certain amount of racism. And also I met people from South Africa, so you can actually learn from these differences. There are differences between Palestine, South Africa, and North America, and these differences actually can make us to learn from the experiences and how to allow people to speak for themselves and describe their situation. Because unless you have Palestinians talking about Palestine from within Palestine, you don't really understand Palestine. I know Ben Ashley is so expert, and he knows so much about Palestine. But until I met people from North America, Black Lives Mattering, it was difficult for me to understand what's actually happening there. And also I met people who went through apartheid in South Africa, and we brought them back to Palestine to try to learn from them. There's a lot, I mean, again, I think I don't know much about Brazil, so I can't learn from Brazil yet. But I think it is important to think actually about satellite colonialism and racism as a process both ways, actually. Things can get better, things can actually get worse. And I think in the case of Palestine, the Israelis are consolidating it. You can actually, for instance, actually I talked to people in New Zealand and Australia, and some people saying that things are getting better in New Zealand in terms of more recognition, more acknowledgement, more indigenous people having rights. I think Brazil maybe also went through some kind of process of reconciliation. So I don't think this is things which can get better, can get worse. And I think we need to look at power and empowerment and also to look at evolution. Things can evolve better. And I think that the Israeli system at the moment actually is going in the wrong direction. But I don't exclude the possibility that one day in the future, I think it was a lady who was talking about shalom and salam and this and that. I don't exclude that possibility from people's peace, actually. One day we will dismantle racism and we will be able to see each other as equal people. I hope one day it will be in Palestine, yeah?
Então, muito rapidamente também quero tocar nesse assunto de para onde que vão esses movimentos, né? Segundo a visão de que olhar a história, o passado, também olhar as possibilidades futuras. E queria só salientar o que Oslo significou para a sociedade civil organizada, né? Porque havia, antes de Oslo, um movimento como o Peace Now, por exemplo, que conseguia angariar e ter ou mobilizar a opinião pública israelense ao ponto de colocar 10% da opinião pública israelense ou mais contra, em 82, a invasão do Líbano. Movimentos que organizavam manifestações conjuntas entre a esquerda israelense, ou grupos pró-palestinos, ou, enfim, grupos não sionistas dentro de Israel, que não tinham uma postura de defesa do colonialismo israelense, com grupos palestinos. Ou seja, havia um coativismo, né, dessas comunidades que Oslo, através de um processo de profissionalização de ONGs, dinheiro internacional direcionando para onde que vai, para onde que não vai o ativismo, acabou levando a uma degringolada desse processo. E hoje o movimento de BDS ele vem suplantar o que acabou sendo a norma extremamente inócua, que não trazia uma verdadeira perspectiva de melhora, que era a de passagem da corresistência entre judeus e palestinos por um futuro conjunto para todos dentro da região, para uma coexistência, conversas pela humanização do outro, iniciativas individuais de janelas de paz ou de coisas que pudessem, digamos assim, mostrar que a sociedade era capaz de conviver. A história mostra que as sociedades são capazes de conviver, não precisam de movimentos, né, com fundos internacionais tentando criar harmonia entre povos dentro de uma situação política que não está resolvida, de um conflito que está deflagrado, dentro de uma região complicada como essa. O BDS vem sinalizando para novamente, uma possibilidade de resistência contra o colonialismo, e que deve ser uma corresistência. E eu acho que a gente tem indícios de que ela é uma corresistência. Ela reúne judeus, palestinos e comunidade internacional consciente. Obrigada.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that this is all we have for this session. We thank you for your patience. It's been a long morning session. We have after lunch a film, the Wanted 18. It will be shown in an hour's time, but we have a 1 hour break for lunch, and then we resume for the film showing. And then after that, we have 2 sessions, one on activism and the final session on democracy in Palestine. So we look forward to seeing you in the afternoon, and thank you very much for attending this morning.